everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 789. Today we're going to take a look at Dune War for Arrakis. This is a new release come out from Come On Games, and this is a 1 to 4 player game set in the style of War of the Ring or Star Wars Rebellion or Battle of Five Armies, in that it's a card driven sort of war slash skirmish game set in kind of the Dune universe there. So if you're not familiar with those games, forgive me, but if you are, you kind of will get the gist. It's 2 players. One side is House Atreides, one side is House Harkonnen with their Fremen or Carino allies, as the case may be. And like I said, you can play it solo, where you always play as House Atreides with the Fremen versus the Harkonnen. You can play it 2-player, which is kind of like, you know, the way the game's meant to be played, but we'll get to that at the end of the review, but that's kind of like the standard way. Then you have a 3 or 4 player game where you have 2 versus 2 or 2 versus 1, and you'll kind of like split the forces that you control between the players, but it's team versus team in that case. So what I'm going to show you here is the retail version. I think at the time I'm recording this, there's still a Game Found pre-order campaign that's up there, where you can get some of the extra like minis and stuff that you won't see here. I'll explain that as I go through. Just the base game has like some minis for some of the sieges and villages and that kind of thing. Otherwise, I think the base game is pretty much the same as like what you would find in the crowdfunding. And of course, there's a couple other, I think 3 expansions that I haven't played with yet. But let's go down to the table. I'll tell you a little bit of how the game works, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts. Okay, so I've got the board like it would look at setup. You can see I've got a bunch of troops out here. There's much of the Harkonnen troops in red out there, centralized. These are randomly dispersed. You always have the exact same number of each of these different troop types. You can maybe see some of them have different bases, like square bases, round bases, different shades of gray or red there. And they're always going to end up in these sieges, but there are these little randomizer tokens, or not sieges, but villages. They're these little randomizer tokens that you'll put out. So you always have the exact same, you know, number of the distribution of the different types, but they may be in different locations based on how setup works. And similarly for the Atreides side, you can see these little sieges here. And these are the pieces that I was mentioning that in the retail game, like you see here, they're just cardboard pieces. These are all face down here, so these are worth various numbers of points for the other side here. So if the Harkonnen were to capture us, they would get 1 point, whereas if we were to capture this other one over here on the side there, would get 2. And then the village tokens here also have different numbers on the other side there. But those are face down, and if you have the Kickstarter version, those might be plastic miniatures you'd put on top. Now in each of the sieges that the Atreides or Fremen are in, you're going to put one of these leader tokens. The leaders are always kind of a lighter color. So if we compare here the Harkonnens, like so, you can see the leader miniature there's a little lighter red, and then this darker red is kind of a normal troop, although the square base indicates that it is an elite troop. So for each of the sieges here, you're going to put 1 leader and then 1 face down deployment token. You use those tokens I showed you for the Harkonnen to kind of distribute them at setup, but the Fremen player will take and randomly put these down without looking at them, but once they're in place they can look at them. So we can see here in this case, okay, this siege has just 2 regular units. Those are indicated by the circles there, whereas this one here would have a regular unit and an elite unit with a square base. So those will be out on the board like so. Now one thing to note is when you move the different units here, as the Fremen, you can move those little tokens like so. You don't have to reveal them unless you want to. Sometimes there's like an in-game bonus or some other card effect that will reveal them. But if the Harkonnens ever kind of get in the same zone or attack the same zone, or you attack with them, then of course you have to reveal it and see who you're attacking with. Now there is a stacking limit of 6 units per legion or per area there. The leaders don't count against that, so leaders are kind of like free, and you will get named leaders, which I'll show you in a minute. But otherwise each figure is, you know, 1 unit. These here count as 1 for the time being, and then when you reveal them, you of course, so if we were to reveal this, we'll put out 2 of the regular units. Then at any point where you have exceeded 6, you'll have to discard down to 6. But you can carry these floating around as 1 unit for the time being. So what is the objective of the game, now that we kind of know what some of these pieces on the board are? Well, there's two different scoring tracks. Now, way up on the upper left side of this board, you'll see the supremacy track there. And you can see that goes from 0 to 10. The numbers are upside down because the Harkonnen player would be sitting over there. But as they score points, these will go up. And then if the Harkonnen player ever gets to 10, they'll win the game. That's how they score. You'll see there's different like icons and things like that that will trigger certain things that are available to the players, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Now on our side of the board, if we're sitting on this side of the table as if we're playing the Atreides, you've got kind of like 3 different scoring tokens. You can see they have different icons there. So you're trying to get all of these up on this track, but game to game that's going to vary. So if we take a look here at this deck of cards, we're going to randomly pull one of these out. And this is going to tell us, okay, we need the green one to be at 5, the yellow one at 10, and the red one at 3. But if we have a different game, we'll randomly draw this card, so 4, 9, and 6. So varying amounts, you're effectively trying to score between 18 and 19 total points, but these might be distributed in a different way based on the game. So it's a little bit trickier, of course, to score something 10 times versus, a handful of times. So based on how that gets shuffled out, it's going to kind of dictate a little bit of the difficulty for the Fremen / Atreides player. And these are going to be triggered by different effects. And as you can see, as these icons move up past these other icons here on the scoring track, certain things will trigger as well. So each player is going to have kind of a dashboard in front of them. I'm just going to focus on the Atreides side for most of this, but it's pretty analogous to the Harkonnen board over there. I will talk about some of the differences there, but they're very asymmetrical, but kind of the core loop, there's a lot of similarities. But again, it's kind of an involved game. So main thing to keep in mind is you've got these action dice. Now the Fremen have 4 of these, Harkonnen has 8. Okay, and then each side has battle dice. You're just going to be rolling these in combats. And both players have the same kind of dice there. Now these have different symbols on them, and these are going to dictate what actions you can actually do on your turn. The other thing you can do on your turn is you can play cards. You can see I have these 2 decks. The Harkonnens also have 2 decks. So to start the game, you're going to draw one of each, and you can play these by spending one of those dice. And these are usually kind of like beefed up versions of the normal actions that you can see on your player board there. But sometimes they're extra special, and you can do certain kind of game-breaking things with that. So we're going to skip what's called the vehicle placement stuff. When I talk about the Harkonnen stuff in a second, I'll talk about that. So the Harkonnens will be able to put out some harvesters and ornithopters and carry-alls, which will collect the sand harvesters. They'll do that, and then the players will then roll their dice. Here, let's just roll some examples here. There's a good example. So you can see it has these icons on there, like that. There's a leadership dice. So we put these on there. But you see, we've only got slots for 2 of them, and we rolled a 3rd one, which I'll get to in a second. Now this other one will go here. So we've got 2 leadership actions and a strategy action. This one you can then place anywhere that you wish, but it has to be somewhere that has the least amount of dice. Well, these 3 spots here have no dice, so I can take and put it on one of those, and I'll just change the symbol there. So maybe I'll put it over here like that. Or since I can never seem to roll deployment in my games, I'll put it there. Okay. And then on your turn, you're going to take an action with your dice. I'll put it up here in your used action dice. The Harkonnen have a similar pool, but just with 8. And then you're going to take that action. Now you can see printed on the board here are the default versions of that action. But you also can get these named leaders here, and there are miniatures to go with them. So we can see here the star of the movie, Paul Atreides there. He has his abilities and also has his little specific miniature. And you can see these are lighter toned, like the other leaders are. So he'll be out there on the field. But these also have beefed up versions of the actions that are printed on there. So if this leader is in play and not in the regeneration tank, because if you lose the leader, they're kind of going to effectively be out of the game for a couple of turns or a couple of actions, and then they'll kind of come back into play. And also to keep in mind, you can kind of see it. Let's use Paul for the example here. It shows the other basic actions that are printed on the board there, but you have this one here, which is in this case green. It's not really focusing, is it? There we go. That's a kind of a once per turn thing. So once I do that, I can pull that down to show that I've used it for its kind of beefed up action there. And the Harkonnens have the same, it's just in red. So you get kind of an extra bonus action there. So I don't want to get bogged down because this will be a very long video, but a lot of these will be moving troops around, deploying new deployment tokens in the case of Atreides, or drawing extra planning cards from Lady Jessica. And then also you've got your wild action over here. And then you can also upgrade some of these with these other leaders. And there'll be different conditions that will bring these into play. Some of these will be based on cards. Some of them will be based on the scoring track hitting certain spots and stuff like that. So that's how these other ones will come into play and then beef up these actions. Now, the thing that's unique about the Atreides player is this desert power action. So they can always do this without spending a die as long as they have fewer unused dice than the Harkonnen player. And at the beginning of the game, that's very easy because remember, the Fremen players start with 4 dice. The Harkonnen players start with 8. So right away, and again, the Atreides player, the Fremen player, always goes first every round. And so they can always do this action until they have equal or more unused dice. And this is a couple things you can do with this. You can either place 2 worm sign tokens, place 2 sandworms, or attack with a sandworm. Or sorry, move 2 sandworms or attack with a sandworm. Now, you have these tokens here. These are worm sign tokens. And these do a couple different things. Let's flip these over. So again, these are going to be put face down on the board like that, and they'll have different symbols on the back. 3 different symbols. What's going to happen is if a Harkonnen player moves into these, a space with one of these, you're going to flip it over. If they're already there, it's not going to automatically flip. They have to move into it. Or at the end of the round, when you go to collect spice with some of the harvesters, or if there is a Harkonnen Legion in that same space, then you'll flip them over at that time too. Now, if you flip over this, nothing happens. Empty desert, no big deal. If you flip this over, obviously the worm will make attempt to eat that Legion or harvester. This one does nothing unless it's on one of the outermost spaces of the board. So you can see this space here. So you can see this space here touches the edge of the board. This is considered deep desert. Anything not touching the edge of the space is just kind of normal desert. And so if you flip this up here, that's basically the same as a sandworm. If you flip it up here in the kind of inner desert, it's nothing. It's basically empty sand. So that's how those work. So again, as an action, the Fremen player can put 2 of these out like so. Now the other idea with these is that you can ride worms and you can move multiple spaces. So normally when you move a Legion, let's just pop up to here. Let's say the Harkonnen player is moving. They just take, oh, we're going to move to here. Everything moves 1 space. Okay? Now, let's do a little bit more strategic here. Let's put this and that there, like that. So in my case, as the Fremen player, instead of just moving 1 space, I can take my little unit here. I can move all the way across here and then land adjacent to this trail of worm sign tokens that I've put out. So they can get out and move a little bit quicker to an extent than a Harkonnen player. Although it's going to take them kind of multiple turns. If they plan on moving really far across the map, you got to take a couple turns to set those out. And the clock is ticking because as the Harkonnen player is using dice, your time crunch on being able to put these tokens out using the desert power action is going to go down. So you have to be very thoughtful about this. So that's general movement there. Now the other thing that can happen here with movement is you can see these spots here on the board. You've got 1 there, 1 down here, 1 over there, and then there's a couple up here, 1 there, and then there's 1 right there. Okay, these spots, you can see these got like little wings on them. During the vehicle placement phase, the Harkonnen player can put out a certain number of spice harvesters, ornithopters, or carryalls. And they can put the flying pieces into these kinds of spaces there. So they could put 1 ornithopter or 1 carryall into that spot. And you can see it affects larger regions. So you can see it's a little bit hard to see probably. So you can see we have these special zones here, but then you have these dotted lines like so. If I pop out a little bit here, It's kind of hard to see. It's not so bad in person. But this spot here, so an ornithopter or a carryall can affect this region and this region here that's next to it, because it's adjacent to like that larger group of areas. So one thing you can do with an ornithopter is you can pull that piece off, and then any legion or collection of units that was in a space that's in that region that's adjacent to that can then move 2 spaces. And then you basically discard that ornithopter. And then likewise, if you have a carryall, let's show you some of the pieces actually. So there we go, there's an ornithopter piece. They have these nice little stands. So again, during vehicle placement, you'll place these out wherever you want. And then again, you would discard that and then be able to move that unit or that legion multiple spaces. Now, if instead you had decided to place out this carryall, which is a little bit bigger, then what that can do is if a spice harvester, which maybe we put out there, is about to be eaten by a worm, instead of losing this, which means you're going to lose spice that you would have collected, because at the end of the round, a harvester there will collect 1 spice. If it's again in the deep desert on the edge, it'll collect 2 spice. So if at the end of the round, as we're resolving these tokens, you're like, I don't want to lose that one, so you can discard this, and then you will save that harvester, so that harvester will not get devoured. And again, you're going to lose all of these vehicle pieces at the end of the round anyway, so you just reset, and the next round you'll be able to deploy them. So that is the main way, the spice harvesting, that the Harkonnens will collect points, at least at the beginning of the game. Because remember, if we look up here, you've got your supremacy track. Now up until you get 5 points of that, you can always spend 1 extra spice, or sorry, 3 extra spice, I should say, not 1. 3 extra spice to get a free supremacy point. But once you get up to 5, then you can't do that anymore. You've got to do it the other way, which is capturing sieges. So if you remember, I showed you the points here on the side of these sieges, and these go from 1 to 3. If the Harkonnens were to come in here and capture that, they would basically burn that siege. In this case, they would get 2 points. So that's the other way that the Harkonnen player gets points. But you still want to collect spice even in the later part of the game. So let's take a look at this piece. So we can see here next to the Harkonnen player board with their actions and leader cards, we have this other little board here. So if we take a zoom in there, you can see we have basically these kind of 3 Imperium markers. At the start of the game, they start up here. So this tells you a few things. 1, you can deploy 3 harvesters, 2 ornithopters, and 1 carryall. And then at the end of the round, when you see how much spice you've collected, again, you're going to get 1 spice for every harvester that doesn't get eaten or destroyed by Fremen, because if Fremen and Atreides move into a space with a harvester, it's automatically destroyed. And then 2 spice if it's on the deep desert. And then what you have to do to maintain the level of these kind of 3 interests, because remember, the spice is not for you, it's for everybody else. So you have the Spacing Guild, which is involved, Chom, and then the Landsraad. Okay, they want spice. So to keep the icon here that's affiliated with their card, you've got to spend 2 spice. So to keep everybody stable here at the start of the game, you need 2, 4, 6 spice to keep it there. Then, well, if you can choose if you want to spend 3 spice to get a victory point. You don't have to do that if you don't want. And then you can also, if you like, keep 1 spice in reserve. You can never hold over more than 1 spice to a following round, but you can keep that there in perpetuity. So that's your spice reserve. Now if you don't, let's say this round, we made 5 spice, so we got 2, 4, we're going to keep 1 left over, but we didn't have quite enough to hold 1 of these, so we're going to drop 1 of these down here. Okay, so the one that you dropped, or let's say we had to drop 2 down because it didn't do very good. So I'm going to give you the rules that are in the 3.0 FAQ, which I think you should play with, and I will mention this in the review part. But the rules as of the 3.0 FAQ is any markers that you drop, you have to then put into play these bands, which give you like a debuff on your team. So you cannot take scouting actions, which is something you can do with the Ornithopters reveal tokens. And then if you have this one, the Landsraad, you cannot discard planning cards to add to combat. And then, for example, this one is your Legion stacking limit is reduced to 5. Remember, it used to be 6. So if these are in play, these effects are negatively affecting you. Now, if in the next turn you are maintaining these, then these bands will go away. So you don't have to raise them back up or anything. But if you want to raise them back up, you got to pay 3 spice to do that. Because the other sort of negative effect of this is if you have, let's say we had it like this, if you have any markers in this, you have to set aside action dice. So these will lock your action. So instead of 8 dice, you'll have 6 in this case. And then anything here that's at the bottom, so if we've got this locked up here, not only are you down 4 dice, but you have a permanent ban. So while this is here, even if it lowered there a few turns ago, this ban is permanently in place. Otherwise, it's just anything that you dropped that turn. Now, in the base game rules, if you had multiple drop in the same turn, then you only had to put one of those bans in place. But the 3.0 rules, which I think you should use, is anything that dropped that turn, ban goes into place. Okay, so again, this is how those vehicles go. So at the start of the round, before the action phase, you're going to deploy vehicles based off of where your kind of lowest marker is here. So you can see your vehicle production actually goes up. So you get 5 harvesters, 3 ornithopters, and then 1 carryall. But again, you have less action dice because you're more focused on delivering spice instead of fighting the Atreides or fighting the Fremen. I'm giving you a very light overview of the game. Let's talk about combat really quickly, just to give you kind of a sense of it. The core game loop is pretty simple. Like I said, Harkonnen deploys vehicles. Everybody rolls their action dice. You take the actions, which is like, moving and attacking with troops, drawing planning cards, or spending a die. Whenever you spend a die, it doesn't matter which one, you can play a planning card and then do that effect. And then you collect spice if there's any harvesters that are still susceptible might get eaten by a sandworm, and then they won't collect spice. And then there's a Coriolis storm effect where the Fremen player will roll kind of sandstorm damage on all of the legions that are exposed and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of rules there with like unlocking the nuclear weapons of the Atreides and the different special abilities of the various different leaders and stuff like that. But just to give you a quick combat example, let's say the Harkonnen player was going to attack here. We've got 3 regular units, 1 elite unit. They're going to attack here, so they have 1 leader, and they're going to flip that over at that time. So they're going to also have 1 regular unit and 1 elite unit that's going to be involved in that combat. So in this case, we're going to roll 4 dice to 2. The leaders don't count for this, although the leaders will have a special ability. So already overmatched there. So we've got our 4 dice, 4 dice there, and the 2 dice like so. And then each player is going to roll dice. So there's a couple of things. These are hits, and you're capped at 6 dice, of course. You have 6 units, but you can never go above 6 dice anyway. If you roll these are hits there. So any hit will have to be applied. And then you have shields there, those will block hits. And then you have, the other side you have here is a special action, which if you don't have a leader in place, this special action is useless. So in this case, we'd have 2 hits, this would block one of those hits. So they only have 1 hit coming through, and then they have a special, but there's no leader here, so the specials are wasted. So basically these guys would have to take a hit, these guys would have to take a hit. Now, the way that elite units work is when they take a hit, they can be reduced down to a normal unit. And the same goes with the special elites, which are hexagon bases. I'll get one of the Fremen ones out here, like this. So if you have one of these, you can reduce either of these down to a normal unit, so you don't lose your dice rolling. The special elites have the ability to also cancel a shield. So they will basically get rid of a shield, allowing another hit to go through. Now the special one here is going to depend on who's there. So here, everybody has a basic leader. So we have these naive leaders. And so this one just counts as a hit. Great. But if we had Stilgar in play, so we had that figure on play, his counts as 2 hits. And then like Lady Jessica, hers would count as a shield, and so on. And then what happens is, after everybody's reduced the units, if you are attacking a fortification, defender can't retreat, the attacker can keep the attack, or they can stay where they are and just cancel it. If they stay, they have to take a hit. So that's just to fight again, they have to take another hit if they're sieging a location like that. And then you'll just have another round of combat. Again, the same kind of things. And then again, if they come in here and took this, then they would get the 2 points. It's a little bit different if a Fremen comes in here. So let's say we take this. This was the North Pole location, and they took one of these. This is 1 point, but you say, hey, they got 3 different ones. That means they would get 1 point on each one. So that's pretty cool. And then if you go over here, there's a city of Arrakis there. Now these are all fixed amount of points based on where it's at. Most of the villages are worth, or all the villages are worth 1 point. Carthage is worth 2. Arrakis is worth 3. So if you get Arrakis, that's 3 of each of those scoring markers, and that can be pretty big. And so there's also an update there in the FAQ 3.0 that if you capture that on the turn that you capture that, and that's no easy task for sure. And then you're going to score. Obviously, you're going to get 3 points on each of those on the track there. Then, if at that moment you have satisfied again your victory condition, then you can end the game right then. Otherwise, you have to wait till the end of the round. So that's a little bit of a different thing, but that makes some sense. It's some thematic sense, according to the books and the movies, where you're taking the capital city, so you should be pretty close to victory at that point anyway. And so it's kind of nice to kind of build up where you get these all kind of close within range, and then have a strike if you can manage it, and then get in there. And there's other rules for nuking things. There's some rules for attacking with worms. I'm not going to get into all those details. If you've seen the movies or read the books, you kind of understand. Then one thing I should mention, which I did not, is these cards here. So you have here these deck of prescience cards, and you're always going to have 3 available in the round. And these give the Fremen player, the Atreides player, 3 objectives. And you can see a couple of things about these. And this is the main way you're going to score points, other than taking sieges. And also, I should mention, there are these, I forget what they're called. They're like ecological stations, I think, where Liet Kynes was doing his or her work. And these, if you capture these, the Harkonnen player does not interact with these at all, but they can leave their forces in a space that has one of these in there just to kind of prevent the Fremen player. So the Fremen player can go around and discover these and then score the victory point according to that. Forgot to mention that too. There's a lot going on in this game. So, but these are different objectives. So for example, at the end of the round, reveal 2 deployment tokens in the same area as Paul. So again, the deployment tokens are these guys here. So you try to get Paul set up in that. So the Harkonnen player can kind of see you doing that because these are face up. And so they have some cards that will cancel these and stuff like that, or they can take actions to prevent you from achieving that goal. So it's kind of an interesting setup there. So when you do that, you would get 1 of each of the points. Whereas this one, action resolution phase, if Jessica is in a sector not containing a Harkonnen Legion, spend 1 action die and place Jessica in the regeneration tank. Score 3 of that. That happens during the action resolution. And then there's another one here. Now you can at most score 2 of these in a round. You can't score all 3 ever. And when you score 1, you don't replenish it. You just discard these or shuffle them back into the main deck there. So it could come out again. If you're like, I can't do that now, but that would be nice later, you might see it again. And then you'll draw 3 more. But you can also, as the Fremen player, take actions to set one of these aside and then keep it back in there and stuff like that. So there's some manipulation you can do with that deck. So you're going to get a lot of points out of this, probably most of your points, especially in the early game. Okay, so that is Dune War for Arrakis. Definitely not a exhaustive rules walkthrough, but hopefully you get a good sense of kind of the game loop, the core game structures, a little bit of the strategy, stuff that I at least hinted at. The basics of it are pretty simple, but there is kind of a lot of window dressing around some of the things, and I think very thematic window dressing, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let us talk about the pillars of review that I do. So first, let's talk about game time, actually. Game says 2 hours flat. I think it's not going to go much longer than that. Our first game of it, I played it 2-player and single player. We'll get that in a second, but it went a little over, maybe it was like 2.5 hours, after teach and everything. But that was definitely, the speed picked up, and in future games have been right around the 2-hour mark. I think it'd go longer though, because I don't know that I've had one under 2 hours, because to me there's a lot of kind of stuff to think about here. And so you can get into, people like to say analysis paralysis. I wouldn't go that far, but you can get to a very considered mode of thinking because you've got a lot to juggle. I'll talk about that in a second. Now, player count, like I said, I played it 1 and 2 player. Haven't played it 3 or 4 player. It doesn't look like it really plays that much different in 3 or 4 player because it's just 2 teams. You do split the boards, the 2 dashboards that I showed you. There's basically 2 for each faction. And then one player basically plays out of one deck and plays some of the characters on that side and uses some of the actions on that side. And the other player does the other thing. The only kind of wrinkle, which is a lot like, War of the Ring or even Star Wars Rebellion, where you have like a general and an admiral. It's kind of like that kind of vibe, but you're doing the same thing. Now, the one sort of wrinkle here, and I don't remember actually if War of the Ring has this or not. I don't think it does. But all conversation is open at the table. You can't like go, and whisper or go in the other room. However, there are 3 cone of silence tokens for each side where you can do that. You can spend 1, and then you can go in the other room and talk. Now, the rules say talk as long as you want, but suggested like 2 minutes. Don't go spend 15 minutes in the other room. But obviously, season to taste with your game group as far as that goes. So that's a little different, kind of cone of silence idea. It's thematic, it fits. So that's really the only kind of difference from this kind of style of game that I've seen with the multiplayer. Now, I haven't played it, but my experience has been, a lot of people kind of poo-poo on playing Rebellion or War of the Ring 4 players. I don't know. I prefer Rebellion for sure with 4 players actually. So I don't know. I don't think it's that different. I will say the single player is really cool. I love that there's a single player in here. Now again, you always play as the Atreides or the Fremen, and there's like a little deck of cards that gives the Harkonnen player a target, like a target siege, and then a kind of a target region. So it's going to go try, based on a kind of a simple flow chart, to go and attack this siege and sort of harvest from this region. And so you can see that. And you flip over 2 cards, 1 for each, and then you kind of go through that deck and then shuffle it up. And it gives you then kind of a couple of flow charts that, so when the Harkonnen player does this, do this. It's kind of like a coin game in a way. It's pretty simple though. It doesn't get too complex, but I like it. It works really well, and I think it's a lot of fun. So I think I prefer the 2 player at least, and probably with 3 or 4 is fine. But for a game like this to work solo is really cool. And I got to play a little bit more, honestly. And that's going to be a theme for the rest of this review. So I like that it has a workable solo mode. And I think it's really good. And I think if you bought this for solo, I'd say, yeah, you might get your use out of it. Again, I'm kind of like still getting my feet wet with this one a little bit. So breaking out from that, let's talk about my last pillar, which is what is this game like, which is kind of the real meat of the review. I've already mentioned War of the Ring, Star Wars Rebellion, Battle of 5 Armies. So super high level review of that. Is this kind of, to me, let's put Rebellion out of it, just for the sake of time, and put this kind of like right in between Battle of 5 Armies and War of the Ring in terms of like complexity and depth and all that kind of stuff. To me, there's a little bit more going on here. Well, a lot more going on than Battle of 5 Armies, but it's also not as complex, and clunky is not the right word because I don't think War of the Ring is clunky, but it's a little bit more streamlined and easygoing in terms of how you are manipulating kind of the dual game, where, in War of the Ring, you've got Frodo and Sam going this way, you've got the fighting going here, you're trying to recruit different nations into the war, that kind of stuff. All this, you're kind of juggling all that kind of extracurricular stuff on top of like a dudes on the map war game. This has the extra stuff, but not to like the degree of War of the Ring. And I think that's both like a good and a bad thing in a way. So, quick caveat, Dune is like my jam, okay? And it's been since I was a wee teenager. And so, my number 1 board game, it's not my number 1 game of all time, is still Dune Imperium. So Dune does some of the heavy lifting there, although I will fight tooth and nail to say that that game is actually as good as I say it is. And it's really high on the Board Game Geek top 100 or whatever. It's way up there. So I think many people would agree. Although I think for a lot of people, Dune is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. But it's a fantastic game. And I think in this case too, I think this is a really good game. For me, Dune's doing a little bit of the extra heavy lifting as well. Now I'm going to try to be critical about it for a second. But before I do that, I really, really do enjoy this game. The one thing where I think it kind of maybe is not quite as good as like War of the Ring is those prescience cards, which I showed you kind of at the end of the walkthrough there. Now, I love the asymmetric scoring where you have the Harkonnen, they're trying to get the supremacy, they're trying to collect a bunch of spice, and then by, midway through the game, they're pissed off. They're not worried about getting spice anymore, and they're just kind of go, destroy sieges and just be a bunch of jerks. That works perfectly. It's great. Where it goes with the theme, I like the kind of seesaw of gameplay and that kind of arc of narratively through the mechanics. Really cool. Awesome. The Fremen player is tricky because they get those prescience cards. And again, like I said, I'm still getting my feet wet here. But even if I get better at the game, this is still going to irk me just a little bit. But this point I'm about to make is going to carry itself, I think, through the rest of these mechanical discussions. And I think folks should agree with this. Because you'll get those three cards up and it's like, do this, have this person here with this person there and this other here, and then, okay, you get some points. And it's like, do this other thing, have this other configuration of things, and then play an action dice to do this. And then you get some points that way. And it feels, on one hand, thematic, because if you have read the books especially, and you've seen the movie, you understand Paul's prescience and his path. Not to spoil anything from the third movie. And his understanding of kind of like trying to set up the pieces in a way so that this thing will happen, and it's like a domino effect of things, causing other things to occur. That it works really well with that, right? Because he's able to like see the future, you know what I mean? So, but it also like sometimes you're like, what is this arbitrary nonsense that I have to have this person over here do what? But I think it's a balance of that, and this is why I also like on the other side of the coin, I'm like, that is cool because you have to set these up to get those points, but also I don't want to neglect taking over Arrakis. Because there's a lot of like forces in play here that you're trying to juggle in a way that really kind of lends itself to the theme of the Dune-ness of it. But from a gameplay perspective, I'm just like, this feels random. And I will carry that sort of thought through. Again, I still really enjoy this game. Because also, when you roll the action dice, and you're like, I really would like to deploy a troop. And you like can never roll deployment, which I mentioned in the walkthrough. And then your other friend across the table is rolling like this marauding horde that's just going tromping through everything. So it can be very tricky to do that and try to play around those actions that are distributed to you. And I can see people being frustrated by that. But it comes down to, I think some games will be won and lost based on that. Based on the dice roll, based on the cards that you draw, the planning cards, and whether or not how relevant they are to what's happening on the board. I think that's going to happen. Okay, for me, it kind of fits the theme. It fits the game. It's going to make the game replayability actually go up a little bit because you're not going to know what's going to be given to you, right? So that's an interesting part of the game, but I know it's going to be frustrating for people that are just like, I felt like I couldn't do anything all game. Now, when I've played this, I haven't felt like I couldn't do anything all game, but I have felt like I couldn't do anything for a little while. But I'm also like, again, like learning the game and learning what all the cards are. And I've had that similar experience with War of the Ring, with Twilight Struggle especially, which I played a lot more than War of the Ring, and even Rebellion, which also I'm leaving out for time. But it gives me a Twilight Struggle vibe too. And that's the other one I would kind of throw in there. And that game, I've had really good games of that where I have like decimated my opponent in like just over an hour, had the same thing done to me, had really good knockdown dragouts that go like 3 hours and it's really close at the end and it's fun. I don't really care if I won or lost by luck because it was been a good epic journey on the way. And this has that kind of thing there where it feels like the games are going to be a little uneven. But I like that about this game, but I think many will not. Not many. Enough will not. I could see some people throwing 5s and 6s on this, for example, on the ratings on Board Game Geek. But again, I'm still getting used to this. I think there's going to be a lot to explore. This is the other positive side of the same coin. Getting to know the planning cards, trying to learn what to do when the action dice don't go my way. Trying to really exploit the desert power action as the Fremen is a huge deal. Huge deal. And it's such a basic action. Put 2 tokens out. Put 2 tokens out. Put 2 tokens out. Because you're sort of setting up a phalanx of possible flanks, if that makes any sense. So you can get certain places and defend certain things. The other part of that is you have, for example, the siege tokens. They're worth 1 to 3 points. Those 3-point ones are crushing to lose those. Because if you lose both of those, that's 6 points. That's over half the points the Harkonnen needs. And the Harkonnen has an interesting, I want to say it's an advantage here, where they can sort of, because they overwhelm with troops and positioning and just economy, versus the Fremen who's a little bit more nimble. And that goes similar to how it works in War of the Ring and even Rebellion with the Empire, or Sauron in War of the Ring. Because they can like sort of cordon off a corner of the board and they kind of work that spice, extraction, get those 5 points. And now they just got to go hunt for those 3-pointers. And it could be those 3-pointers are really close to where they're at. And they could be really far from where the Fremen player needs to have their stuff because they want to score their points over here because they got to arrange the stuff because of the prescience cards. So again, depending on how that stuff is dealt out, it could make things easier or harder for either side, either way. So that's another piece of it. So the game has a lot of those moving, randomized setup pieces that, can swing balance. But again, I'm a Dune guy, so I'm like, yeah, this is cool. I like this. But I think if you're coming at this from a non-Dune perspective, I don't know. I mean, it could be a little bit random there. I will say though, now speaking from the Dune perspective, it has it in spades, way more than Dune Imperium. I mean, Dune Imperium to me is very thematically tied to the subject matter, and then the old Avalon Hill game, also really, really good. To an extent, I think people oversell that, how much that has to do with the IP. Because I mean, it does some things that it's like a little different. But this one to me is the most Dune game. I think it fits right in with the end of the second movie or the end of the book. It employs thematically, not just like the dudes on the map stuff, but again, all of the cards, the different leader abilities are really cool. I really like it. That's one thing I would say I think is really fun and balanced to a degree, is all the various leaders, the named leaders and stuff. Really cool stuff that you can do. And those really fit. They really, really fit the theme and the characters and everything out of the book. That is where the game excels, and the card play, all those different cool effects. Like you get these little like Dune moments that are going on. That's where the game is really, that's what it does best. And that's what it should do. I mean, this is not trying to be, I don't know, Kalis or Zulkan or something. You know what I mean? It's not trying to be this fine tooth edge balanced Euro perfect economy. It's not trying to do that. But it's trying to be a Dune game. And I think it may not be my favorite game that has the Dune name on it, but it's my most Dune game that has the Dune name on it. And again, my feet are wet. I couldn't end up really enjoying this. It may surpass Dune Imperium. I don't know. Dune Imperium has the mechanics that I want in a board game. Forget about theme. So it's got the worker placement, deck building, economy, got all that stuff. And so that's putting it above. Then that's a personal thing. But if you like a dudes on the map, a war game and that kind of thing, or if you're just really into Dune, I would say, again, if you said, you just give me the best Dune game, I'm like, well, this one. Easy. But again, you got to know all those caveats that I gave you. There is one other thing I feel like I'm forgetting. There might be a glitch in the edit. Oh yes, that's what I was going to bring up, is the FAQ 3.0. Got to play with that. No question, do you have to play with that. It does some fixes to the balancing of the game, I think, and I think you got to do it. I talked through in the walkthrough in a couple of spaces in terms of capturing Arrakis. I talked about that in the walkthrough, and then also the Imperial bands. When the Harkonnens lose, they lose whatever dropped. I think those are very key changes. And from what I've done a little poking online, I've heard that different expansions will swing the balance left or right. So I'm excited to go try those, and we'll see if those are. I don't think they're out yet, or they only went out with the first Kickstarter. I'm not sure, but eventually, I'll probably come back and do a review of at least some of the expansions or all of them together or something at some point. That'll be a while, but again, there's some tweaks for the balance there. You can do the Spacing Guild and the Smugglers, and there's a new one coming out, so that might pull some balance strings there. But again, yeah, so kind of a double-edged review, but again, I said what I said. I really like the game. I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite games so far I played this year. But again, you got to be ready for sometimes looking into the future don't always work out. I don't know how many books anybody's read, but of that series, but yeah, that don't always work. So anyway, enjoy. Thanks.